Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
Beach FM 106.3. I'd like to welcome back to the program now James Westbury, wearing a slightly different hat. Well, in a way. Now, recently James has been talking not only as the chair of the Waikanae Community Board, but also as a prominent pharmacist, and that is the hat that I'd like him to wear this morning, because something seems to have happened in recent months. We, of course, have had this thing called COVID-19 that most people are aware of. And one of the things that happened, it seems to me that the consultations with GPs were severely limited, and a lot of the prescriptions that were issued were electronic prescriptions, e-prescriptions, and I've heard various reports of strains in that system. So that's what I'd like to talk to James about this morning, the e-scripts, whether they're working and whether they're not. And James Westbury, good morning. Are you willing to talk about this general subject this morning?
Oh, of course I am. It's something quite close to my heart. In some ways it's been quite useful, and sometimes it's been quite frustrating. So not only as a provider of services that is adopting the technology, but also for helping individuals who are trying to transverse the complications and nuances when it doesn't work, and that can be equally frustrating for patients just wanting to pick up their regular prescription under the COVID-19 circumstances.
Well, could I ask you firstly, what is an e-prescription?
A number of years ago, the government of the day embarked on establishing e-prescriptions. E-prescriptions are essentially a barcoded prescription that has a unique identification code on it that's generated by the general practitioner's PAS, which is patient administration software. And different GP practices use different software, so they've integrated into a national, essentially data warehouse where when a prescription's written, it generates a unique code, and that code follows that prescription wherever it's presented at a community pharmacy. So when somebody, typically before COVID-19, they were handed their prescription, and some people might have noticed their GP practice prescriptions had a little barcode down the bottom with these unusual, often numeric letters on them. And what the pharmacy does when they receive those is we scan them, and what that does is it downloads the prescription from the data mart, essentially, that's owned by the Ministry of Health, or they call it an exchange broker, to be more honest.
Right.
And as a broker, it's a bit unreliable, and it's been put under a lot of pressure over the last few months where, the Ministry have been expecting the gradual rollout of the e-prescription service, and what happened with, a couple of hundred practices being on this, it's gone from a couple of hundred to nearly 99% of all practices using it. So it wasn't really in the, didn't have the capacity or the resilience to take on the intense volume as it did over COVID-19.
So COVID-19 has sparked a crisis. Is that too strong a phraseology?
I think that would be a good definition at this point in time. It's really been quite challenging for the broking service, and also some of the software. Having small volumes of people using e-prescriptions hasn't caused many great degree of concern, but when you've got large volumes of people, more errors have been picked up, or where the process isn't working, and then some of the systems have just been overwhelmed by the sheer volume of prescriptions that have been generated. So what often happens is people often present to their pharmacy and say, the GP's notified me my prescription's been delivered, and sometimes it can take up to 2 hours for these prescriptions to work their way through to the selected pharmacy if it's either been faxed, which is the traditional way, or using secure email. And some of the secure emails were taking, in some cases at the height of COVID-19, up to 24 hours to release the data. They were just absolutely struggling. But what was happening is, with COVID-19, the Director General of Health was unable to waiver what we call the typical prescriptions, where we didn't need signatures. But then there are a couple of technical aspects where a controlled drug, which comes under a Class C controlled drug, still needs a signature on it and doesn't have a waiver even when it's using an e-script. So there's all these little technicalities that a lot of pharmacies and particularly patients have been caught out with, and the doctors have all been caught out with not knowing the legislation in enough detail. And unfortunately, pharmacists by our very nature are quite pedantic and devil for detail, and it means that we can't dispense those medicines. It's not that we don't want to, it's just that we need to follow the legislation. Otherwise, we could be prosecuted for handing out medications that don't meet the legal requirements for a controlled drug.
Well, obviously, you've got to be very cautious. And could I just ask about those e-signatories? Is that the signatory of the doctor or of the patient who's received the prescription?
It's an e-signature is essentially the barcode associated with the script. It comes from the doctor's surgery.
Right. Okay.
So it's a signature waiver, which the Director General endorses. And what's been happening is a number of these e-scripts. Sometimes you'll get given a paper script, and it means that we can just download or just process the prescription naturally as we normally would. But with the advent of COVID-19, we were getting emailed prescriptions, or some of the software we were supposed to have special inboxes in our software that would receive prescriptions, and that's not been as what's been promised by the vendors hasn't actually materialised, and all it's done is create a lot of frustration from pharmacy, to be honest, and also for GPs. I've got a lot of sympathy for both pharmacy out there, community pharmacy, and even GPs. We're all just trying to get this done together, deliver a really good service, and ensure that patients get their medicines. And this process has been really challenging. Typically we used to do about 15 to 20 e-prescriptions a day. Now we're doing hundreds and hundreds of them a day. And traditionally you could sort through those very quickly. When you've got a pile of 700 prescriptions that have come through in the last 2 hours, it's quite hard. And then people walk into the pharmacy and say, oh, my prescription's there. But you've still got to work through the process of reviewing what has been processed, what hasn't been processed, what's come in via email or what's come in via fax. It was quite complicated. But now we're back to pretty much normal, and we're starting to iron out some of the kinks that have happened with the e-prescription service.
And I imagine the frustration is with the patient who seem to have this notification that the prescription is ready, whereas from the process you've described, it may not be even able to be processed for another 24 hours. So obviously it's a less than perfect system at the moment. It's probably a really good definition for less than perfect. It's certainly not ideal. It does get us through in terms of a patch, but I think the e-prescription service certainly needs a little bit of review, and a bit of a post-mortem needs to be undertaken on what's happened, what's gone right over the COVID-19, what's gone wrong, and start putting plans in place to address it properly and thoroughly, because I think some of the COVID-19 really forced us to go digital. Let's make the most of being digital. Let's not go back to where we were, because I think it's created some efficiencies. Unfortunately, the e-prescription service doesn't create a lot of efficiency to pharmacy. It is for doctors by all accounts, but for pharmacy, we're still stuck in the dark ages where we're printing off these e-prescriptions to download them, to print them off so we can read the barcode. So we're certainly what you call no less paper being generated. Oh, goodness gracious me. And I suppose it varies from pharmacy to pharmacy, does it? Just what facilities you have available to you?
Most practices now have the e-prescription service geared up for in their practice management system. It just depends on what software they're using, because there's software called MedTech, there's My Indice, or there's My Practice, and all of them to differing degrees are better or worse at the e-prescription service. My Indice, or Indice, for example, it's still got a few teething problems, and MedTech, for example, have been languishing behind Indice in some way.
So, James, is this, in essence, in theory anyway, a perfectly good idea, but the devil is in the detail, which is lacking at the moment?
Indeed. It's the e-prescription service is a really good one. It's one where technology and the legislation that governs the management of prescriptions, the legislation is behind the technology. So unfortunately, you've always got to go back to the legislation about how medicines are dispensed, how prescriptions are written, which determines a lot about how the e-prescription service works. So really, they need to be doing these in tandem, a review of the legislation and maximising the benefits of e-prescribing. Because at the moment, for controlled drugs prescription, say for people who have an e-prescription for morphine, for example, once upon a time people used to have a triplicate copy for their CD scripts. Yes. You know, you had your red, yellow, and your plain copy, and they were carbon copies. Now, even with the advent of an e-prescription, we've got to generate, as a pharmacy, we've got to photocopy and the e-prescription to make sure we meet the mandated requirements for a controlled drug script. So it creates more work for us. Whilst it's good for GPs, it frees them up with time, but certainly doesn't free up pharmacy.
Well, this, I was going to say, this is ridiculous. It certainly sounds that way. James, I believe you're a board member of the New Zealand Pharmacy Guild as well, is that correct?
I am indeed. I'm a sucker for punishment.
Have you heard from your colleagues on the Guild whether they are having similar problems?
In terms of, I haven't spoken to Guild members directly with regard to the e-prescription service, but I've spoken to a number of pharmacists in my constituent area that I'm responsible for, and a number of them have been suffering what I'd describe as more than teething problems, a high degree of frustration about the e-prescribing service or prescription service. To be honest, it's been a bit of a fiasco.
Well, a fiasco tends to beget some kind of inquiry. Have you heard of any moves to examine the service, the strains it's been under recently, under, let's face it, extraordinary circumstances, and whether you've got any hope it may be sorted out in the foreseeable future?
I haven't at this stage. We haven't even been given more firm guidance about when the temporary waivers that were made by the New Zealand Director General of Health about using e-prescriptions and signatureless prescriptions. So we don't even know where they are with regard to that. We were expecting guidance. In theory, the guidance runs out around the 26th of June. And at this point we're none the wiser, so hopefully we get some more guidance about the continuation of the e-prescription service and the waivers that have been offered to pharmacy and general practice.
Wow, watch this space. This has been very informative. I really am grateful for your time, and thank you for joining us again here on Beach FM. James Westbury, thank you.
Thank you.
106.3 Beach FM.